Hello everyone, I'd like to preface this video with a short disclaimer. This video was not sponsored by Northeastern University, nor was it sponsored by the EAI, of which I speak briefly in this video, nor was it sponsored by the Align program, and the video and the podcast do not represent the views of any of the aforementioned entities. I would also like to just unfortunately say that due to some technical difficulties, starting out with a new camera and microphone setup, and I'd first like to say that the video cuts out unfortunately after 30 minutes, and I will be providing you with some wonderful views of the Silicon Valley if you are tuning into the video version after that time. Also, I had a wonderful 2 different microphone setup, but unfortunately that also copped out and was unable to record the entire podcast for Aaron. So the audio may be slightly suboptimal for this iteration of the podcast. I do apologize in advance, and I hope that I will be able to get these technical difficulties sorted out for the next episode. Nonetheless, please enjoy episode 1.
Welcome everyone to episode 1, the first official episode of the CS Express podcast. Today I'm here with my guest, Chieh-Han Chen. That is your name, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to have you on the show, Aaron. Really excited to have you on the show today because you seem to be a really good example of somebody who's entered the tech world with some full force, and you seem to be doing some cool stuff and learning a lot. And I tend to learn something from you every time that we meet. So I'm really happy to have you on the show today. Do you want to go ahead and maybe tell your listeners a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what your background is?
Sure. Well, first of all, that's very kind of you having me on the show, and I always learn a lot from you as well. So we can cover all that. And obviously, there's like so many things that you trailblaze, on our campus. So I think those are like really good examples that you set for people who enter like a later cohort. You're a year ahead of me. I joined Northeastern last fall of 2023. And same program as you. I'm an Align student. I'm originally from Taiwan, and I actually was studying in Hong Kong. And before this, and I was working in Hong Kong as well. I actually did my undergrad in business, so I didn't really brush up on the tech world so much. Although when I was working as a marketing professional, so my undergrad was in business, and later on I became a marketing professional, specialized in like ads, especially Facebook ads. And also we were launching new products on websites. So we were working with programmers a lot, just putting out landing pages, setting out like specific website pages for like, for example, Black Friday sales, Thanksgiving sales, those kind of things. And I was working mostly on the visual or the deployment of those things instead of like the back end and the maintenance of those codes, but it always fascinates me what my colleagues were doing on the programming side. And a little rewind, if you will, let's rewind a little bit. In college, my final semester, actually second to last semester of my senior year, so basically wrapping up my university career, I was actually on exchange in Boston. So in Hong Kong, we have like a really good exchange program. So on my penultimate semester, I was in Boston, and I was taking a course in Java, and I really enjoyed that course, and I also apparently did really well in that course. Because a lot of my classmates were asking me how to code and how to do these things, and I was like, oh, it's just somehow I just had this knack or just understanding of how things work, or I just have interest in delving deeper into it. I think when I was younger, I've always been interested in like engineering side of things. I like to fix appliances. When I was younger, like if like some sort of pot is broken, I would like open it up, look at the circuit, and try to figure out or troubleshoot what's wrong with it and try to like fix it without employing like professional services. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but little did I know back then that's basically a process called like debugging in programming, or trying to troubleshoot. I think a lot of people have this mindset that programming is a lot about like crunching numbers. But in reality, it's more about solving problems. And, a lot of times it's not even a lot of math involved, but I would say it's more logic involved. So if you like solving puzzles, Rubik's Cube, I think programming is great for anyone who enjoys puzzles. I'm definitely one of them. So, and fast forward a few years, I worked a few years as a marketing professional, sort of put the programming part of me aside, just focusing more on my main undergraduate's field of study, so to speak, and made a decent living. And actually, when I was 25, I got headhunted to another company, a small and medium-sized enterprise, and I became like the growth manager. So I was like, oh wow, I made it! Like, I'm 25 and I'm a manager now. And I was getting paid decently, and my main job was working with our branch office, which is in Japan. I do speak Japanese, and so I was supposed to travel between Hong Kong and Japan a lot, right? And my boss said, like, we're gonna send you a lot on business trips and all that. And I was like, great, I love going to Japan, and it'd be nice to get out of Hong Kong sometimes. But then as soon as I started, COVID hit, so it became very difficult to do my job. It's almost impossible. Like all our meetings were like online, and for me, I'm a firm believer of like remote work only works if you have some sort of rapport that you build up face to face prior to that, or some sort of workflow that you have already established. And if you don't, it becomes very hard to establish those sort of things online if you are starting out remotely from the get-go. So it sort of just didn't work out, and I parted ways with the company, and I was looking basically, okay, during COVID it was like a huge reset, and for me it's just kind of like rethinking my priorities in life and exploring like some of my other interests, and so after that I took some time off. I play guitar. I love music, so I actually moved to Los Angeles for a little bit just to some time off and study music in Hollywood a little bit, play some gigs there. Had a lot of fun, but I decided like later on it's time to get back to business. It was nice. I don't particularly love like playing music commercially, but I love playing it for fun. And I tried like playing it for like as a career, and it wasn't necessarily the lifestyle that I love. So I decided, okay, I think it's time to like pick up on this almost shelved pursuit of mine to get a master's degree. I actually wanted to get one out of college, and then I started working, and then I was able to get sort of climb the corporate ladder, and I was able to sort of get into a pretty good place and a nice package that I had. And so that plan sort of just got shelved, and then COVID happened, so the plan was further delayed for like 2 more years. So I worked for 3 years, long story short, before I decided it's time to go for a master, although initially I was supposed to go after 1 year of work. And a lot of my university friends who actually went on and become software engineers, they actually worked for, they actually didn't work before going to their masters, and they just went straight. But they did have to do it during the pandemic, which is a completely different experience.
It's a different beast, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, like the world just changed, and it feels like it's a different era. So basically after that I decided, okay, I applied to a few schools, and I want to get into tech, and there are not a lot of options honestly for people with like no tech background to get into tech. There are boot camps, but honestly I was looking to get a degree, and Northeastern was top of my list. I also applied to a few other schools, and eventually this is the school I decided on, and here we are 1 year later.
Very cool story, man. Yeah, it's hard for me to believe you've only been here a year, because I mean I've seen you around. I feel like we've known each other for almost longer than that in a way. Time really flies fast. time really flies by in this program, and also when you're working in tech as well, where it seems like everything is moving at a super fast pace. But I often tell my friends around me, hey, we got to enjoy this time while we're here, because it really flies by. It's a time that we can treasure later in life as well, where we're learning this stuff for the first time and really getting into it. So it's amazing how far we've come in that the year that you've been here and the 2 years that I've been in the program as well. So what has for you been I guess my next question would be, what is the most interesting thing about learning CS now as your sort of second career? What has been sort of the most interesting thing that you've learned so far?
Well, honestly, first I gotta say it's nice to be a student again. That's like acknowledge that, because both of us have worked before, and it's not always the most enjoyable thing. Trying to, like, for me, it's like catching sales numbers, and that wasn't fun, or admin work. Those were fun. Getting paid is fun, but doing the work, sometimes the stuff that you don't enjoy as much, it's laborious.
I hear that.
Yeah, so it's nice to be a student. I think we covered this a little bit on our personal conversation, that when you start working, you're basically expected to do your job well and just your job, and you're probably like, if you work for a big company, you're like a cogwheel in like a well-oiled machine, and you're expected to do your job well and try, just focus on that instead of trying to learn new things. So learning almost became stagnant when I started working for a few years. So that's something I like noticed, even when I try to like take online courses on my own free time. Sometimes it's just, you worked overtime, you're so tired by the time you get off work, you just want to blow off some steam. And in Hong Kong, like, we actually work really long hours as well. And yeah, sometimes like overtime is almost expected of everyone. And yeah, sometimes you're not allowed to leave before your boss, which is I don't know if that's the best way of work, but yeah,
kind of authoritarian almost. Yeah,
that's the reality. And I'm sure in a lot of places that, like, China and Asia, it's like that, very hierarchical. So that also factors into why I want to transition into tech, right? Software engineers have, obviously more autonomy, and it's a more efficient strategy. I think one thing that I love about, like, programming is like, you're always chasing this thing called, like, efficiency in time, and this efficiency in, like, how you're doing your work, how you're running your code, how you're allocating the spaces in your memory, and how you're using whatever resources you have and trying to maximize its potential and try to cover as much ground as you can. So that's obviously, I think, one of the biggest things that for me was very interesting in CS. That idea of, like, not wasting resources, because for sure, like, in marketing, that's probably not the mindset, and maybe that's why we have a lot of, like, disputes with people who are working in the finance department, because they're always asking, why are you spending so much budget on this ad, for example? Where's the return on investment on this? And sometimes it's indeed, we're not, like, using that budget in the most wise way. Sometimes just, like, throwing money at a problem and not really allocating our resources to the best of our abilities. So I would say that's, like, definitely, like, a mindset shift, because marketing is, like, a lot of times about, like, volume, instead of, like, quality, or instead of, like,
quantity over quality,
efficiency. Sometimes just try to, like, show or be top of mind. You show an ad as many times as you can, and hope that people remember it.
Yeah, play the numbers game, I guess.
Yeah, like economy of scale, right? It's big. So that's why, like, companies with bigger marketing budgets tend to do better. It seems, but I think, like, the mindset shift going to, like, software engineering is definitely, like, different. So for me, I have to, like, relearn that mindset. Just trying to be more efficient in how I, like, approach a problem and look at things from a different angle. And for me, like, as a student of programming, the most interesting thing, and I think I'm in, like, a very unique position to actually make a comment on this, is I studied programming pre-AI, and I also studied programming post-AI. And the methods were very different, and that was, like, something that I really noticed in myself and also in people around me. I think pre-AI was like mostly when I was on exchange. I was learning Java, and we're mostly like copying syntax on from the textbook. And then we were learning like a lot of basically just sort of like how you learn grammar in language.
Right. Repetition, exercises.
Yeah, and you have examples, and you get like practice problems, and you do them. And you discuss with your classmates a bit, but mostly it's like, it's really just reading off of a book and try to like replicate it, sort of. I guess the old way of like learning a language, like Rosetta Stone or something like that. And I'm sure like as a person you can testify to that as well. That's not often the most effective way to learn a new language. I think for me, like growing up learning Japanese, the best way that I found was like to immerse myself in the environment or talk to a native speaker, right? And with AI, that's almost possible because now you're talking to this, top class programmer, who's at your service 24/7, anytime you want. Just open up ChatGPT and ask a coding question. This morning I was asking ChatGPT to help me study something. And it doesn't just tell you the answer; it will guide you through it, and that's I think that's a game changer completely. I think the old way of studying is more like it's like one directional. Like either you get it like from a lecture, or you basically absorb the information from, for example, like mediums like books, and you read it, or you watch YouTube videos, right? But the new way of learning is like you have this virtual assistant that you can interact with, and it's not only giving you information, but it's also helping you process your thoughts as if it's a real person who is very knowledgeable in this area and any area. So I think that's like very powerful because you're not just receiving information, but you're providing information. In turn, the AI or the model behind it's basically it's like customizing and giving you a tailored experience of learning that you wouldn't have otherwise achieved without AI. So I thought that was a very interesting and monumental shift in how we learn pre and post AI.
Yeah, really good insights. I also tend to see, I recently co-authored a paper with my mentor here at Northeastern, professor that I'm working with, and the title of the paper is Smooth Talking Machines. And the idea is that we should, some of these chatbots and AI can be very smooth talking and seem very fluent, but the idea is not so much to always just get them to give us answers and things, but it's to find some uses where the chatbots can really shine. And what you're describing to me now is sort of an educational aid. Seems to be one of the cases where chatbots are able to say, hey, can you give me a quiz on this topic, and use your vast resources to come up with questions that will help me learn or help me understand a specific part of what I'm learning. Seems like, as the paper would say, some good uses for these smooth talking machines. You might not always want to ask them something that is either subjective or that requires some very fine-grained analysis because, as many people may be starting to learn, sometimes there may be issues with accuracy or what we call hallucinations, where it could come up with something that's not 100% accurate. But as an educational tool, as an educational aid, it seems that what you're describing, and something I've noticed as well, is that using them to assist us in trying to find our own answers can be one way that these tools can be really used to the maximum benefit in our cases. Some people out there might think, oh, hey, we can just use these tools and immediately replace, a copywriter, or immediately replace an accountant or something like that. I think we're a little bit far off from that at this point, because some of those tasks really require a certain level of analysis, or can't 100% trust the machine to come up with that answer on its own yet. maybe not in the next year or so, probably not, but as in terms of an educational aid that you're describing, I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of something that we can use them in the short run. Some task that they can do really well is helping us learn something new, helping quiz us on something that we already know, help us verify an answer that we might already be sort of simmering down in our head. So those are some cool use cases that you've described. Yeah, I'd also like to just also go off of what you were saying about efficiency. I mean, I sort of tend to see CS everywhere now. I don't know about you, but having learned some of these concepts in the classroom, I sort of see them bleed out into other areas of my life as well. Recently, I was moving, and I was in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I have all these boxes in my living room. I'm going to take those boxes, and one by one, if I didn't have someone to help me, I would take the box one by one, the boxes, and move them down to my truck or whatever downstairs. And in my mind, I was thinking it's going to take people, if I have movers, it's going to take them a long time to bring all the boxes down, because they take box one at a time. Maybe there's 2 movers that have to take one box at a time. And when the movers arrived, they immediately piled up 3-4 boxes on a dolly and brought them downstairs. And just in my mind, I was thinking, I mean, that might be obvious to some people, but my immediate reaction to, I have all these boxes is it's going to take a long time to bring them down one by one. And immediately, someone else who's a professional who's been doing this for a while had this idea of, here's one way we can just speed this up right away, right? Just take 4 or 5 of them at the same time and use a wheeled thing so we don't have to break our back carrying all these boxes, right? And I think algorithms and efficiency and sort of big O notation, these things that someone might learn in their first year of studying computer science, are sort of similar, right? I mean, you realize that you start out, you're writing code for the first time, and then you realize, there might be a faster, more efficient, slightly better way, or much better way that I could do this, and it might be the difference between my algorithm or my computer program taking 5 minutes and 2 hours. And when something like ChatGPT needs to give all these, probably millions of people asking questions every day, the difference between 2 minutes or 5 minutes and 2 hours for one person asking a question is quite large. It's quite sizable. So I also had a similar mind-blowing experience learning about this efficiency, these affairs of efficiency, and how these are considerations that you just need to take into account when you start learning CS for the first time. Maybe not for the first time, because you got to get your bearings first, but as you gain a little bit of experience and you start really writing programs that you want to accomplish certain tasks, hopefully you're thinking about how to do them in an efficient way, as you're describing. So I definitely am on board with what you've described there. What was the most challenging thing for you? What was sort of I don't know, I know what it is for me, but the thing that really threw you for a loop, or the thing that you struggled with and hopefully helped you grow as well, but something that might have been a big challenge for you when you either started or even today, maybe yesterday or something. Whatever was the biggest challenge for you so far?
I think just to nerd a little bit, I guess the concept of recursion. When I first came across this concept, it threw me off a little bit, because it's not how the human brain usually operates, but it's almost like a unique way that the computer operates. So for those listening in new to this concept, recursion is basically a way of solving a problem that's using basically a function that calls upon itself. It's kind of like Inception, like a dream within a dream, a function within a function.
Mm-hmm.
It's so I'm sure, like, even if you just hear me like describing it, then it's like it's hard to wrap your head around. And I remember there's a very funny thing that before I left Hong Kong, one of my friend Anthony, who's already a software engineer, and then he was asking me, have I been like doing some like pre-studying before I started my program? And I was like, yeah, I just like look at some stuff and then try to learn some basic like syntax and like basic like grammar of how you like program in different languages. And he brought up the concept like, oh yeah, have you covered recursion yet? And I was like, no, what's that? And he just like started laughing. He was like, yeah, just wait till you get to recursion. And then he was right. Once we got to recursion, everyone was like, what is this? My brain is burning. I think I'm just going on overload right now. Maybe I should just go there and work at McDonald's.
I guess it's all fun and games until the recursion starts. I can attest to that as well. I feel like along the journey, right, you think that it's going to be sort of a straight line from, okay, I learned this, and then I learned this, and I learned this, and then you have some concepts like the concept of a function calling itself and doing recursion that all of a sudden you think, I thought I understood up until now, I was doing okay, and then all of a sudden something can throw you for a loop like that when you're when you experience that for the first time. But did you make a lot of progress in that area? I guess I'm assuming now you've probably progressed a little bit. It became easier over time if you practice enough with it.
100%, because it's like, I feel like computer science is about like learning how to think like a computer.
Yes.
I think a lot of people have this like idea that algorithms is about like just strictly for computers or like for math, for solving things that are like scientific or very technical or like very niche and very like, you know, specific to like one field, and that's like, you know, only for like PhD or doctors. But actually algorithms is like trying to come up with ways to solve real world problems, and that's what engineering is about. It's trying to build and trying to create solutions that people can use in the real world. So it's not as distant as people think. It's not as theoretical or abstract as people think. In fact, it can all be like very practical. So I think for me, trying to make grounds on these concepts such as recursion and try to learn how to think like a computer, you have to give yourself examples that you can understand. And obviously the classic example that we have is, you know, the Fibonacci sequence that everyone starts with when we learn recursion. And I think just finding examples like that, and it doesn't even have to be like math examples. It can be examples like, like Inception, a dream within a dream, something like that, you know, just help you to visualize that concept. At least that's how I approach it, you know, finding things that can help me visualize the concept. I'm definitely more of a visual learner, so for me, being able to like picture or imagine something is very important. So yeah, that's for me the way that I managed to like learn that concept and sort of achieve my learning milestone in computer science and on conquering the topic of recursion.
Nice, man. Yeah, that's you have a pretty inspiring journey. I mean, I haven't really met anyone here who didn't have an inspiring journey so far in terms of, you know, you moving from the business world and from the work world, similar to me in a certain way, to reconditioning yourself a little bit to think like a computer scientist and to understand these concepts that are sort of maybe math, but also finding a real world application. I think is a really good point that you raise. I think that's one, you know, benefit. Once again, I think we always need to specify this. Not a sponsored by Northeastern video, but I think Northeastern does a really good job of giving these real world examples. Right, you don't start with some very abstract sort of thing. You definitely dive into the theory and the math as well when the time is right. But when people are first starting to code, you know, if you just throw a bunch of stuff at them, they might sort of be like, okay, well maybe, you know, I'm not as much of a mathematical thinker yet, or maybe this is a little bit hard to digest. And so the innovation behind the line program and stuff is that you do really get those real world examples, or you have a real application, something that you're trying to solve, as opposed to just numbers for numbers' sake. So that's been a cool experience for me, and it sounds like you've had a similar one. Also, quick note, we are in the Northeastern campus currently. For those who are in the video version of this podcast, you can see behind us, we're in one of these little nooks. We have these little sort of study spaces on campus. I might try to do some videos of showing people around at a later date, but these are sort of isolated study spaces where you can come if you have a meeting or podcast that you like to record. So that was the quick blurb about where we are and what we're doing. But yeah, beautiful campus here for anyone who's thinking about potentially coming to Northeastern and maybe doing the Align or the direct entry CS program. Yeah, let's change gears a little bit and talk about, well, you've mentioned AI already, so I don't even have to tell you that that's something that's on a lot of people's lips today. But what is the thing that excites you the most about where the field is headed today? Specifically, I guess, with regard to AI, anything in that sort of space. Is there anything that really excites you? I mean, we're sort of living around announcements with OpenAI and Google. Is there anything in there, or even just doesn't have to be, you know, OpenAI, but could be something that you're specifically thinking is really a big game changer, something that you think is exciting to you?
I think definitely like the possibility of potentially achieving AGI one day. And for those listening in, AGI is artificial general intelligence. So by adding in the general, basically it's AI that is just like a person, can reason like a person, and can understand emotion like a person. Maybe not feel emotion necessarily, but can understand emotion. So it's basically having a human-like robot, and that's not actually human, but talks and acts and thinks like a human would, especially like the reasoning part. I think that's like very exciting, because I love like sci-fi movies. I've always loved like sci-fi movies growing up. I love Dune, I love Iron Man, and Jarvis was like definitely one of the things that I've like when I watched the movie Iron Man. I'm like, how cool would it be if one day everyone can have their own Jarvis? Right? And basically Jarvis is like artificial intelligence, and it would be so cool if we can actually get there one day, because right now I definitely heard the industry professional talk about AI in a very unique way, and basically he said right now AI is basically just glorified search. It's a very powerful search engine, but the only difference between AI and Google is, instead of you sifting through the information itself, clicking on like 5 or 6 links, it's summarized for you. The tool or the agent basically would read through all those content, process those in like speed that a human cannot, and summarize it for you, right? But when you boil it down to it, it's still search. You're just retrieving information, and you're not synthesizing anything new. It's already pre-made. And I've definitely tested with this kind of concept, like can it make something new? Like, can it create? So like me and my buddy who was also into music, we actually tried to like ask ChatGPT to write us a song. And this was like before the new model, so I'm not sure how representative it is of the current capabilities, but because they just announced the 4.0 model this Monday. Right. It was done like a few months ago, actually last year. And yeah, we asked ChatGPT back when it was only GPT 3.5 to write us a song, and came up with songs. But yeah, honestly, I think a 5-year-old can do better. It's like the worst and the most corny lyrics that you can find on like pop songs.
Did it rhyme at least? Did it at least sort of?
It did rhyme.
It
rhymed terribly. Like, it was not beautiful. Like, it was not Bob Dylan. It was not literary genius.
Yeah.
It was.
We've got a ways to go.
Corny.
Yeah.
It was very corny. It was just like, oh, this is just like copy and paste of whatever song formula you have, and it does not tell a story. Like, it when I read through the lyrics, it evokes no emotion from me, right? And I think that's the thing about like creativity that's so hard to replace, and it's like essentially it's a very human experience. It's like humans create in many forms, and songs are music, and songwriting is obviously a big part of it and big part of culture as well. But the songs that humans create, sometimes it like doesn't make sense. Like, there's a very popular song called Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo, and it is not really about driver's license, but it's using like driver's license to tell like a story. And when I listen to the song, it's like, okay, it evokes some sort of emotion, right? I was like, okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it brings up some emotion in me. I was like, okay, yeah, it's like a milestone when you get your first driver's license and all that. It might be attached to a significant someone, or when you first become a driver, you want to like take your significant other on a ride or something like that. So those things I don't think ChatGPT can like understand, because that's like very human experience. So yeah, like I think in that area it still falls short a little bit in terms of like synthesizing something new or being creative, and especially when it comes to things like creative or like artsy by nature. So but my biggest hope is that one day we'll get there, and it might be 10 years or more, but once we get there, it's I think it's going to be so interesting. And the most exciting thing is like we're just touching the surface of what AI can possibly do and help humanity, and it like we haven't even like conjured up all the possible uses. Like right now it's basically used just as an assistant, as a chatbot, but there's so many other uses that I feel like people are still like trying to figure out, because it's all very new to everyone. So just imagine like all the possible ways that we can use it to improve our lives, or like replace jobs that are like dangerous, or sort of extend life expectancy, or end poverty, aid in cancer research, all these grand milestones that humans are trying to achieve but haven't got there. Maybe these breakthroughs that we're looking for could be accelerated if we first achieve AGI.
Yeah, that's you're very optimistic about the future. I like that. Yeah, I mean, you raise a lot of interesting points, right? I mean, idea of creativity or a metaphor, does a, there's some different extremes that we can see that researchers and people out there have. I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but there's a paper out there called Stochastic Parrots. Stochastic, essentially, for our newcomers, just essentially means random, and parrot, well, we know what a parrot is. You say hello a bunch of times, and the parrot hopefully learns to say hello, but it doesn't necessarily understand what hello means, right? You might be able to figure out that you say it every time you see somebody for the first time or something like that, but I mean, it's an extreme viewpoint, even just the title of saying that, are these machines just basically regurgitating things? And then there are other people out there who think they are real expressions of creativity, and everything in between, right? There's a wide spectrum of what people see these machines as being, right? But there's definitely some things even on a linguistic level that you can think about. I'm working with I have a researcher in a group that I'm working with through Northeastern, who gave a really great example recently where you have a sentence like, the city of Barcelona is all excited today, celebrating its win against, Real Madrid or whatever, and this, its streets are full of fans or something like that, right? So what do you have in that sentence? Or is how many entities do we have in the sentence? And if you ask ChatGPT or many of the state-of-the-art models, it will say, oh, well, you basically have Barcelona, you have the fans, and you have, whatever, something else, city or something. You have these three sort of nouns, basically, very grammatical understanding. But in reality, you're actually talking about different Barcelonas. When I say Barcelona, the city, I'm talking about the government of Barcelona, the government of the administration. When I'm talking about Barcelona versus Real Madrid, I'm talking about a sports team. So there's actually Barcelona, the sports team, Barcelona, the administration of the city, and Barcelona, whatever, the actual city where people walk around in the street, right? So even something which to us is it's so simple that you don't even need to explain it. I don't need to explain to you that, like, okay, yes, Barcelona, the team, is not the exact same thing as the city. It's an actual team of players and people, right? You know this. You don't even have to think about it. But some concept as simple as that is a thing that a machine has a really hard time with. And even today, with all of the progress we've made, we still have some things like that, and creativity may be among that as well, where the concept of just basically doing something new with language, or even understanding it to a high degree, can be something that a machine is not ready for yet, even despite all the advancements that we've made in the last 10 years or so. We've made a lot, and even last, more than 10 years as well. But yeah, also a funny thing that we're talking about this as well, and the people being very impressed by this stuff. There was this guy named Weizenbaum back in the 70s who made this chatbot, the original chatbot called Eliza, right? And it was this Rogerian psychotherapist that would basically, if you said something like, you'd just be a prompt, right? Prompt kind of like we have now, but it was a self-contained computer program. We didn't have the internet back then, I guess. And the idea is that you would say type some prompt, like, say, tell me about what's bothering you. And you'd say something like, oh, well, my brother and I got in a fight. And it would say, tell me more about your family. It would sort of have these responses that you could probably algorithmically come up with, right? That like, okay, brother is some keyword that is related to family. And a therapist would probably say, hey, tell me about your family, or tell me about your mother, or something like that. And it would just sort of condition the responses based on these keywords, essentially. And it was still a complex program, and at the time, people were baffled. People thought like it was the end of the world. A lot of people were really scared. People would spend hours talking to this, digital psychotherapist, right? And it sort of is a little bit of a deconstruction, sort of almost a way of thinking as well, that like, oh, maybe your therapist is just basically saying, tell me about your family and stuff. There's a little bit of that in there as well. But the point is, people were, this is really legendary in the computer science world, right? People talking about Eliza. But when we think about ChatGPT and stuff like that today, there is almost a little bit of an impression that you might get where if you ask it to write an essay on, industrialism or something like that, the Industrial Revolution, it can write it maybe, and the first time you see it, you're really impressed. The second time, maybe still impressed. Third time, it gives you still a different response on 3 different topics. After you've seen maybe 10, 12 essays, you start to see some resemblances between them. In a way, we've made a lot of progress. We've done a lot of great things. But the inherent principle of we have some algorithmic way of interpreting language or using language that a machine can manipulate, that is almost unchanged, even since this time. We've added a lot of really amazing bells and whistles, but some of that is sort of almost, I don't know if it's, going to change in the next couple of years yet. But still, you can be very impressed by the capabilities of a system like ChatGPT. And we should be, because there are a lot of things that it does really well. But we should just also keep in mind that, every time that we have some novelty like this, it does seem very impressive, but we can also see a little bit of, okay, there are some limitations here. And also, compared, like you said, you're a musician, and, you can understand that there's a lot that goes into songwriting, and there's a lot of emotion that you feel as a human that a machine almost definitely doesn't feel, at least not yet. So that can be a key, essential part of artistic expression in many ways. And I think as creatives, in a certain way, we do believe that music, songwriting, even copywriting or other script writing and things like that do require some level of creative expression that a machine at this point does not yet possess in the way that we humans do.
Yeah, and can a machine ever understand what it means to be a human, the quintessential human experience, things like coming to age, falling in love, or heartbreak? Can a machine ever understand these concepts?
It's a good question, ever. Right? Yeah.
It's how can you teach a machine? It's not human, first of all. How can you teach a machine how to feel like a human? And at that point, is it still a machine anymore? These are almost existential or philosophical questions. I think, but we cover some perspectives there, and I always like perspectives on getting different viewpoints. We cover what could go right with AI. Why don't we cover we put on our little cynist hat now, and what could go terribly wrong?
Oh yeah,
right. With AI, are we talking about an iRobot or a Terminator scenario? Yeah. What do you think? I'd like to hear from you what you think could go terribly wrong.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of doomsayers out there. I don't know what you even call them, but I don't really share the perspective that AI is going to take over. I don't share the perspective that AI has some sort of desire to dominate us. And I certainly don't share the impression that tomorrow jobs are going to immediately disappear. I think there's a big transition there. So we need to keep some of that healthy skepticism about the media saying that the entire industry of screenwriting is going to collapse. The entire industry of XYZ put it in there. As a translator, I know that, I've seen the capabilities of ChatGPT, and I don't think that it's going to replace translators tomorrow. There's a lot of sort of really subtleties that you can have in a translation that it's not yet ready to do. And this is something that years of professional experience has taught me. So there's definitely some bias in some things that can be introduced by models, right? I mean, there's a model called BERT, which was released in 2018 by Google. It's really the Swiss Army knife of the NLP world. And for listeners who are unfamiliar, NLP is short for natural language processing. It's essentially the field of getting computers to understand human language, as opposed to just programming languages and things like that. So BERT is this model that was trained on what Google says is somewhat, essentially neutral text. It wasn't trained on some sort of propaganda from a dictatorial regime or something like that. It was trained on Wikipedia and Google Books, right? It's just a collection of many books over the last, I'm not 100% sure what is in Google Books, but, standard literature and textbooks and novels and things like that. And Wikipedia, we've been on Wikipedia. We know that Wikipedia is not a particularly biased by nature type thing. There's a lot of information on Wikipedia, but you don't expect to go on Wikipedia and see some very specific propaganda or something like that. It's usually, maintained by the community. It's sort of encyclopedic. And yet when you type into you load the BERT model and you run a prompt, there's something called mask fill where you can essentially say fill in the blank. It's like when you had those tests and you were a kid, and maybe you still have them today, and it says, whatever, a robin is a blank, and you have to fill in the blank with a robin is a man, a robin is a bird, a robin is a computer, or whatever, right? And so BERT, the language model, is able to fill in the blank. A robin is a with bird. So it actually has this association between the words of saying, I identify that a robin is associated with the closest concept I can think of is a bird, because that's what it is, it's a bird. There are other limitations with this mask thing, the mask fill, as I'm talking about, but we won't get into them in detail now. The idea is that if you put in there, a man is a blank, and you say, what is a man? You usually say, a man is a doctor, programmer, president, I don't know, stuff like that. You put in a woman is a, and the first things that it spits out are, a nurse, a woman is a prostitute, it's things that are sort of, show some type of bias, or could show bias in certain situations, not that, well, whatever. There are different ways to interpret some of these things, maybe the idea you see nursing might have been for some time a female-dominated profession, so it's not, completely improbable that you'd have the word nurse with women if you're looking at historical text, right? But when we're doing some sort of thing today and we're saying we're trying to present some system like ChatGPT that is hopefully not presenting a bias, this can be much more of a difficult situation, right? Because like we said, we live in a society that has some, or has historically had some biases. Some of those we might be trying to correct in different ways, and hopefully we are, but the idea is that these language models, which are supposedly trained on very neutral text, where Wikipedia is not something that's, once again, propaganda, even when you train on something as simple as Wikipedia, which should be neutral, you get the biases of society, which may be sexist or racist in different ways. And this can be a huge issue for things that we're trying to do with language models. Like maybe we're using AI. Many people know that we use AI to do approvals for credit or for loans. And if there's some information in the model that may be biased towards certain groups of people based on their income level or their background or their ethnicity or something like that. And then their name, maybe they have a foreign name or something like that. We don't know 100%. So one big thing that can go wrong is that these big systems that we might be implementing at scale in banks and in the court system, California court system uses AI in order, since like a long time ago, they use AI to determine bail amounts, right? So you are accused of a crime, you come in, you need to post bail so that you don't go to jail, or you can stay out of jail while you're awaiting trial. And it's maybe giving higher amounts to certain people, lower amounts to other people algorithmically, but there may be bias encoded in that. And that can be very hard to detect. So a big thing that can go wrong is that, first of all, this is a very obvious bias of racism, sexism, and all of these things that, are huge issues and, sometimes are very subtle even in modern day life for humans. But in addition to that, there are other biases that can be introduced, which might be as simple as advertising or something like that, favoring certain companies over other companies. When you have job applications, favoring certain candidates over other candidates because the model may be, machine learning models usually learn by the number of examples you give them. If you give 100 examples and most of the people who get the job in the end were people who went to Harvard and Yale, well, maybe somebody who went to another university is going to be overlooked by the model, right? So these are things that, once again, a human could make this type of analysis as well, right? And maybe for certain jobs, maybe the Harvard person was the better person. I'm just saying that, there may be people who are very highly qualified who are overlooked, and that's sort of a subtle bias as well. It's not sort of a big no-no of, you're sexist or racist or something like that, but it is still something that is not only representing a particular inclination that the model has towards certain groups, but is also something that's very hard to detect, and it's also something that's very hard to correct, and it's also something that's very hard to find in the pipeline, like where along the way did we go wrong, right? If I ask Bert to tell me why it says that it thinks that a woman is a blank should be filled with prostitute, it can't tell me why it made that decision. It can't say, oh, because you have this text. Because if it said because of this text, maybe you could say, okay, well, that text is maybe not going to be the first one considered for such and such problem, right? You could maybe use that type of information if you had it to improve the system and to reduce the bias. But right now, if I say, use a deep neural network, which is many of these pretty much all language models are based on neural networks. If you use a neural network in order to make a prediction, right, in order to fill that word, there's no way that you can really know where that came from. You might have maybe a word in the sentence tipped you off and you used this to help you make your prediction, but you don't know why we made that choice, right? And if I ask you to go back up the line and say, I'm auditing you, you didn't give a loan to this person and they're now suing you. Can you tell me why you didn't give a loan to this person? Well, you can't tell me that currently. I think people are working on it, right? But currently there's no standardized way of doing it. Maybe some banks are implementing more interpretable models that are able to answer that question of why you made a decision. Why did you reject my credit application? Why did you reject my loan for my business? I'm sure that there are solutions out there that provide that service, and there are certain types of machine learning models that really offer more interpretability than others. But especially with language models, and a lot of people are using ChatGPT, they're only as good as the data that we give them, right? And if some of that data is racist or sexist or represents a bias of some kind, how can we find out that that's the case? And also maybe more philosophically, who decides what is biased and what is not? Maybe some people have a certain inclination towards certain scientific theories and they're putting other scientific theories to the side because of, whatever affiliation they have with different schools or different schools of thought. Maybe some people can say, oh, well, let's discount certain ideas that come from certain groups that might not be, ethnicities or something like that, but still represent biases. And also, like we said, these things learn at scale. So if you give it lots and lots and lots and lots of data, it learns from that data. And so if that's the case, we could be learning things that are just blatantly incorrect. Especially ChatGPT generates things. Some of these things end up online on forums. And if we know that ChatGPT can produce inaccurate results, and it even tells you that when you're in the prompt window, if it's producing inaccurate things and then these inaccurate responses are being absorbed again and ingested by the system, I mean, maybe not with ChatGPT. I'd hope that they have some safeguard against that, but we're not sure. Basically, we give language models information, they produce some answer. The answer could be incorrect. If we then absorb that incorrect information, how do we know it's correct, right? And not to mention, if you've ever spent any time on the internet, which I'm assuming you have, a lot of people say some stuff on there that is, incorrect, just wrong information, or maybe it's outdated, or maybe it says, someone is president even though they're not president anymore. Maybe it's just old information, right? So these are things that are difficult to remedy, and we have some systems in place that can do so, but a big part of what could go wrong with AI is, well, if a lot of people are using AI to make decisions, these decisions could basically be made using some of the bias that humans have, but also a lot of the biases that are present in society that we don't want having any place in a decision. And if we just have too much confidence in these systems, then that bias is going to be absorbed. And like I said, this vicious circle where the bias is absorbed and then it's used to make future decisions, because all the decisions that the model makes are then maybe fed back in. We use this historical data to help make the decisions better. And then over time, this bias sort of accrues interest, we could say, right? Kind of like a loan. It just keeps picking up interest and you're paying more over time. So in the end, I'm a bit worried about the bias that can be present in these models and, where we're getting our information, and also how we can really make things interpretable, so that if I say, why did you make this decision, or why did you predict this, or what's the source when you tell me that this is the scientific theory that you're citing for me, right? ChatGPT might have this sort of, I give you an answer and I'm very authoritative when I say it, but where did you get the information? What's the source? Where did that source come from? What are the sources of that source? Et cetera, et cetera. You should be able to really go up the line and validate everything. If I'm somebody who wants to audit the system, I should be able to know exactly where everything came from. And then we're a really long way off from that, right? Even though we're able to produce really good-looking text, very fluent text, how do we ensure that it's accurate? How do we ensure that if I want to check the source, I can check the source, and that the sources that you're giving me are hopefully the best sources out there, and that you're giving me multiple pieces of the puzzle? That's what I think really could go wrong with AI.
Yeah, again, that goes back to the fact that it just can't reason.
Yeah,
it can't really, when you ask why, it sort of just reiterates whatever answer it gave you and paraphrase it a little bit. It doesn't provide any justification for its actions or words, and that's because it's really just summarizing or researching information for you in a very sophisticated way.
Yeah.
So we'll see where we go from there, and a lot of it is because biases already exist in the system. Systemic biases already embedded in a lot of these data that are being used to train models. And I guess one solution that they're trying out is, obviously, with Google, I know Gemini 1.5 Pro, the latest model they're putting out, basically is using RAG, or that's acronym for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And using that, basically, if you feed it some research paper, some PDFs, it will return whatever information you're asking for, and it will also tell you where it got that information from, right? So kind of like when we write our papers or when we do our research presentation, we have citations. Now they will cite, but how I look at it as that's more like a passive solution. It still requires humans to go back and look at it, and it doesn't really, checks itself. I think ideally in a utopian world, right? Let's say, 10 years, 20 years down the road, you will have AI being able to check other AI and make sure, there's no biases, in whatever that AI agent is, creating or generating for the user. So that might be some way to tackle this down the road. And you mentioned hallucination is a big problem with a lot of these systems, and sometimes you can't blame the system. Sometimes I feel like what AI, its pitfalls is just reflecting our pitfalls as humans, and it's not like AI is not creating things that weren't there before, because obviously it still doesn't have that ability to synthesize things out of nothing. So obviously what it outputs is a product of the input that we fed it. So I think we definitely have a huge responsibility and a huge stake in what we're feeding it. And obviously sometimes we think that if the more data the better, and little do we know that maybe there's already existing systemic bias that are already in those data. And obviously we've heard about the little Google pitfall, the little fiasco with the image generation ability of Gemini, not being able to generate a representative image of a certain race. And obviously Google, they came out and apologized for that. But even a company with as many resources and as powerful as Google in terms of like processing power and access to resources would make this kind of mistake. How safe can we say smaller companies or people who are experimenting with AI on their own are with obviously their limited resources and limited accountability, so to speak. So it's definitely a growing area of concern, but I feel like people are trying to address it, but we're again just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, I think we also don't want to underestimate, the power of open source, right? There's a lot of researchers out there, like Jan LeCun talks a bit about open source, and there are people out there who, I don't know, I'm sort of in the middle, right? Because I feel that big companies are doing a lot of good things as well, and they're sort of pushing the boundaries, but open source, there's a huge open source community out there. What do people do? There's researchers and people who love playing with things, who love experimenting with things. And Google or whatever will release their new model, and then the open source community will find a way to make something really similar that anyone can experiment with, that anyone can play with. And while people are playing and experimenting, people are doing amazing things. Like people might be working on classifying toxicity or classifying, things like bias or building more interpretability. So can we build a model that's going to then take the output of the model, like you said, and determine if has some bias or something like that? And people are working on that. So I think that it's important this is an opinion of the open source community. I don't, necessarily endorse it 100%, but I think that we don't necessarily want all of the decisions that are made about responsibility and bias to be left only to a bunch of people in Silicon Valley, right? We need some cooperation. We may need government to help us with this. We may need open source community to help guide us, right? Because someone will come up with something, they'll do it. Maybe OpenAI comes up with a new idea, they implement it, and then the open source community follows and they come up with something similar, and then anyone can use it. And then open source comes up with something really amazing, and OpenAI says, okay, great, we're going to do that too, right? It's sort of like checks and balances. Yeah. If one gets far ahead or does something really bad, the other one will come in and say, hey, we have some solution, or why don't you do this, or why don't you think about this? So people keep each other in check in that way. And that's why I think that what you're saying is true, but also we need to keep in mind that, just because Google has all these resources doesn't, like you say, mean that they're immune from, overcorrecting or implementing another bias of some other kind in their model. And so the idea is just that we need lots and lots of different people involved, and people in different countries and cultures too, because everybody has different things that they're sensitive to, right? Something that might be acceptable in the US could be offensive to another country, or could be sort of excluding people who speak another language or something like that, right? These are things that can happen when we're dealing with AI. And we need everyone involved, right? And that's why we talk about Align, we talk about Northeastern. We need people from other fields. can't just have a bunch of computer scientists that have done computer science since their very first day of undergrad determining everything, right? We need people who say, hey, I'm a philosopher, I am someone who comes from literature, I'm someone who comes from law. We need people from different fields that can come together and actually say, well, this is what's wrong with the system, this is one way I think we could fix it, or this is what I would do in my profession in order to combat this particular risk. And this is maybe something that someone who knows more about code can do, but when we have more of that cross-disciplinarity between different people from different backgrounds, really amazing things can happen. And I think that's what we're starting to see now a little bit with some of these, some of the open source community solutions that are out there, and even the people we can see at Northeastern who've done amazing things with computer science, not even despite, in addition to coming from another field that, could be anything. And there are people here from law and medicine that might have their take on how we can improve AI in those fields as well, right? And that diverse background is really welcome. Little plug for the Northeastern Experiential AI Institute, the Institute for Experiential AI, the EAI, which is a part of Northeastern and really works on these responsible AI issues. You can look them up on LinkedIn or just the website for Northeastern to see more about what they do. I work with them through my capacity as a research assistant currently, and some of the RAG that we're talking about as well. We have something in the pipeline. I can't say more about it, but something to do with RAG that is in the works. So these are things that lots of us are thinking about, and it's good to see that you're thinking about them as well, and learning about implications and what is available to us in order to move forward and combat these risks.
Yeah, cool, man. That's been a really nice conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
And really enjoyed this. I'd love to come back again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I loved having you on here. I really, the first episode of this podcast, well, the first real one, I had my pilot, but this is the first actual episode with a guest. You were a delight to have with us, shared some very interesting insights. So, I look forward to maybe having you back in the future, and I will see you around.
Yeah, thanks, man.